Okay, got a BWS in, needs a couple of things done to it. First thing is the fuel gauge ain't working, so that's it I'm going to jump onto right now. Alright, first thing is of course drain the tank. So a bit of a two-step process is what I followed. First thing was I just siphoned out the majority of it, then started the bike so that just ran dry. So of course now float bowl is empty as well. Focus please. Ah, wonderful. So float bowl is empty, tank is empty. I've disconnected the wiring loom as you can see, and what I've done is I connected the multimeter to this and tested the resistance as per the manual, and didn't get any readings whatsoever. And another reason I couldn't get any readings was you can't really see in there because it's pitch black, but the actual float was kind of dangling, which tells me that it's actually broken as such. And I'll show you what an unbroken one looks like shortly. Okay, there's an unbroken one. We've got a new gasket that'll go in, and that's the fuel sender itself. Sparkly and clean. Not cheap, as is often the case with Yamaha of late. Okay, so that's the sender. So it'll obviously sit in the bike like so, and there's a little rheostat in here. You can actually feel it clicking as it goes up and down, and the factory recommends testing this by a multimeter set to ohms and connected to the connectors. So I'll do that now, show you what readings I get. Okay, you can see getting a reading of 77.8 ohms, and that is with the fuel bowl, with the fuel tank empty. So I'm just going to turn this upside down so that the float goes all the way to the top, and you'll see how the resistance drops. So that's how you test it, based on that, and just double check the manual what the exact settings are, or the exact readings at least. But if you're getting anything off that, you need to replace it. Okay, a couple of steps to get the tank off. Obviously there's a couple of bolts. I've got an Allen in there. That's not standard, that's aftermarket. So these two mismatched ones. I'll take off the two-stroke filler neck. There's two 10 mils here and two 10 mils either side on the front of the tank. So I'll pull those out, and then I'll show you what the rest of it looks like. And of course it's not just the electrical connections, it's the vacuum and fuel lines that go to the carb. So I'll just disconnect them from the carb and that'll come off as one set. Actually, let me do that right now. Alright, times one. Times two. Alright, so that's pretty much free. Now time for some 10 mils and some other hodgepodge bolts. Okay, so tank is loose, two-stroke filler neck is loose. I've taken off the seat lock as well, so that's just being held on by the cable, so that's fine. Good job. So the tank is loose, so I'm going to put my phone down so I can do this with both hands. And of course the old top tip is keep your nuts and bolts in one concise spot. Alright, there's a tank. She's often inverted in a good old ice cream tub. Can't go wrong. So this is a bit of a farm bike, so lots of dust and grit. So I'll obviously just clean everything off before I undo everything, because the last thing you want to have is sand in the new gasket area. So I'll give this a quick clean and then I can start pulling it apart. Also kind of making note of the routing of these cables, and then of course the position of the float itself. I mean, it's facing the fuel tap, so fairly straightforward. Okay, so everything's loose. Just a quick note is the position of the gasket. So that's obviously the old one. There's the new gasket. You can see those raised sections. Those kind of protrude through that galvanized plate. So just be mindful of that when you're positioning it, because you don't want it to be obviously upside down. It's going to leak fuel like crazy. So that'll be the mating surface onto the tank. So there's obviously this kind of raised section on the outer perimeter and this little raised area on the inner diameter as well. And so there's the old one, a lot of rust in there. I think that could have actually been the problem there. Perhaps one of the grounds has died, because there's still a nice kind of clicking motion as you raise and lower the float, but it's also quite rickety. Anyway, there's no resistance on this, so it's dead, so it matters not. Okay, that's obviously the aperture where the new senders will go into. I've given it a good clean with some carb cleaner. A little bit of rust there, but nothing that the gasket won't sort out. And that's it, done. 4 little 8 millis back in there. The manual says 6 Newton meters on those suckers, but I'm not keen to strip them, so those are done by hand, just with a screwdriver and a socket, because the last thing you want to do is destroy that, particularly because there was so much rust. I don't know how much of the actual thread inside was left, so I was very much erring on the side of caution. So anyway, it's done. I'll reassemble. Obviously all the paired up nuts and bolts will go back in as well, and I'll return the rusty one to the owner. Okay, all back together. All those 10mm nuts are back on. I torqued them to 8 Newton meters. I've connected it. That's not connected because this bike's running premix. I then promptly went to test it, and of course it didn't work. As I turned the ignition on, nothing. Then I realized, of course, the tank's empty, so it's not going to give me a reading. But thankfully, when I took the new sender out of the pack, I connected it and moved the float from empty to full, and it was working perfectly. So I had nice kind of action on the needle. So I know it's working. Now it's a question of completing the rest of the bike, which is a bit of an undertaking.